This is the first in what will be a series of 3 videos about the Grand Theft Auto Trilogy Definitive Edition for Nintendo Switch. I have previously covered the Stories games and Chinatown Wars, but now we have 3 more games in the portable space, which just means I get to delay GTA Advance even further. My history with the Grand Theft Auto series has already been explored, but every video is someone's first, so here we go. As a child who was honestly far too young for it, I started playing GTA Vice City, which was a part of my family's small but growing PlayStation 2 library, thanks to the fact that I have 4 older brothers, some of which were old enough to be able to legally purchase the game. I fell in love with this game. It was my first exposure to a game world this open, and it beat up the closest thing I'd seen to it, which was Driver 2 for the original PlayStation. I didn't care for the excessive violence, it honestly grossed me out, and all the writing from the actual story to the jokes on the radio flew over my young head. But this was a monumental game for me, and not just because I used cheat codes to turn the protagonist into a woman, which made me feel complicated feelings at age 8. But sometime during this Vice City honeymoon period, my brother showed me another GTA game, one that came out before this. It was called GTA 3. Wow, I have more Vice City to play. I was so keen to play it, but I stopped caring shortly after. This was Vice City, but worse. We played as a mute, the controls and vehicles were more limited, and this was a boring grey city with no charm to my little kid brain, plus it didn't even have Waiting for a Girl Like You by Foreigner. I stopped playing it, and even though I was disappointed, I still had Vice City, and eventually I'd get San Andreas, which improved upon this base even further, and then we had the 2 Stories games, which brought this freedom to a portable, and I wound up putting more time into those PSP games than the console games they served as prequels too. And while my opinions and tastes matured, my view of GTA 3 didn't really change, except I went from finding it lacking to good but still the weakest of a good bunch. Teenage and young adult me wasn't the smartest either, because I've replayed GTA 3 for the first time in over a decade, and I have a whole new appreciation for it. But I do hate myself, so I went for the quote-unquote definitive edition for Nintendo Switch. Look, I'm the portable person, and if I wasn't playing it on the Switch, I'd be playing it on my phone. To which some of you out there will be saying, "What's the difference?" before laughing for a few seconds. Before I gush about my newfound appreciation of GTA 3, let me get the obvious stuff out of the way. This definitive release is scummy, it doesn't look visually good enough for a 2021 release, it was clearly given the bare minimum effort in that regard, textures were upscaled or replaced without proper consideration for where to be placed. You can have fun just noticing all the areas that look terrible, it really is that noticeable and distracting. The game's original art direction is lost, and it is a shame when you really think about some of the creative choices the original game had, and how it has been replaced by something more comparatively soulless and generic. I'm part of the problem for buying this, and nothing I will say will convince people that this is the definitive version of a game, because frankly it isn't. This game should not have replaced the original, it is a supplement to it, and if I was to do a one-to-one comparison between the visuals, I would generally say I prefer the look of a 20-year-old version instead of its brand new release. Cool, we've got all that processed, now let me talk about what I like about the core game, the improvements in this port, and then kick it back down to the ground because it's not a completely dead horse yet. And just for a curveball out there, this lazy version is actually my favourite way of playing GTA 3. Goodbye my PS2 copy, goodbye my Steam copy. In fact, goodbye to the Steam version entirely. I'm coming into this remake as someone that saw months of complaints, glitch montages, and saw multiple updates bring it to what is almost a retail release. I had many people tell me not to play this game, especially on Switch, but I never learned. So now we're at update 1.0.5, and a lot of the funny stuff is gone, and the game is presentable, especially if you're not really looking at it too closely. The game opens up to Claude, our protagonist, being portrayed by his lover during an armed robbery. He's subsequently arrested and then is in a transport vehicle to a penitentiary now that he's been sentenced. Fortunately for Claude, this truck is intercepted by people and an escape occurs. Not because of him, but because of someone else in the vehicle at the time. Claude is just very lucky right now. This is all very fortunate for Claude, who is a no-name and implied newcomer to Liberty City, But an established criminal 8-ball was in that truck too, and he'll give Claude a safe house and some basic connections to the criminal underworld, so we can start this journey up the criminal hierarchy. This start is effective and conveyed with so little. It sets the precedent for this game's ethos. Unlike later installments, the game's story is barely even a thing here, which is saying a lot, considering how little people generally care about the stories in this franchise. Claude is clearly on a path of revenge to kill his ex, Catalina, but this piece of wood doesn't say it or emote it or even look like he's capable of any thoughts beyond killing, nodding his head and bowing to show respect. This isn't a complaint. It was for my younger self. I saw these as drawbacks, but now I fully embrace this lovable mute. The GTA series has a problem where a lot of its protagonists want to live relatively normal lives, but are forced into deeper conflict. They'll soliloquy about how their forced situation is terrible and how they want a quiet life like Nico Bellic or even Vic Vance. But then, thanks to player control, there'll be ruthless mass murderers in their downtime. It makes the character's actual characterization feel hollow because there is a huge disconnect between them and our actions. Claude avoids this by not really having a personality at all. Everything he does can be justified, that's just who he is. He feels like a GTA 1 or 2 character plucked out and put into the third dimension. In fact, this whole game kind of feels like it, emphasized by the fact that the original release, but not the definitive one for some reason, even had a top-down camera mode as an optional novelty. It's easy with years of hindsight to see this game as the formula of later games, but more basic and limited. But we need to remove that hindsight and see GTA 3 as well. GTA 3, the sequel to GTA 2. When we do that and don't stack it up against later titles, the charm of this game wins out and we only see the good instead of focusing on things that will be improved upon with later titles. This is the most arcadey of the 3D titles as well. The earlier games were similar to this, and even later top-down titles like Advance and Chinatown Wars would follow suit, but GTA 3 shows that this formula can be translated wonderfully into 3D, and it seems entirely effortless. Story is an afterthought, character development is barely here, and the characters really only get layers of complexity when we see them in other games like Salvatore, who is in San Andreas and Liberty City Stories. Here, he is just a generic mob boss, and that's fine. That's all this game was going for. Just don't expect to write long character biographies about characters exclusive to GTA 3, without a thesaurus and a lot of redundant ways of repeating yourself, like using many synonyms. What you see is what you get here, but that's not a problem. What you get here is fast-paced action with no pretenses. While the story isn't anything spectacular, it is presented in a cinematic way, and for the time this was quite novel. The nondescript characters here may be boring, but they all look and act distinctly, at least for what little we get to see of them. There are a few small twists thrown into things, so we do get a little bit more than a simple revenge story. It's now a simple revenge story with some memorable scenes that last a couple of minutes. Particular highlights include Claude walking right into a trap because he takes work from anyone, and Claude killing an ally of his and framing another gang for the murder, and then just chilling out with the family of the guy that he just murdered like it's no big deal. If Claude was a talkative character, scenes like that would lose a lot of their charm. Story missions follow very simple templates here, and they rarely ever have multiple stages or sections beyond what you're originally tasked with. They're so simple that some of these just start by Claude reading a letter given to him by one of the characters, and that's the entire objective. Complete it and you're done. Go here, kill people, and do that over and over and over. The biggest curveball to all this is sometimes you have to kill people but using a specific vehicle so you can frame someone else for it, and once you do what you're tasked with, it's all over. There isn't a casual drive back to get more exposition from your friends, it just suddenly stops, and it doesn't want to slow down the fun at all. Missions are boilerplate here because the entire concept of a game like GTA 3 in 2001 was enough to carry the entire concept, and the arcadey mechanics and the vehicle physics still give this game an addictive edge today, even when this genre is oversaturated and stagnant. The loop is always fun, but it'll be the same loop all the time. Most of the missions blend together, and the ones that don't are the really surprising ones, like fighting off waves of suicide bombing addicts, which had different connotations during its 2001 development, I'm sure. The game opens up its segmented islands at appropriate intervals, and it feels rewarding to see more of this world open up, even if each new section is less interesting than the last. The controls of the game have been improved with this remake, and we have multiple different pre-figured control options, which while not as good as a fully rebindable system, does mean more people will find what they prefer. The classic controls are still here as an option, but I was surprised by how nice the modern configuration is, even if it goes against all my muscle memory I've built up over the decades. It allowed my fingers to be better spaced around the controller, and I didn't have to do any kind of awkward claw to do multiple things at once. And the PlayStation 2 and PSP GTAs had a very boring lock-on system, which did all the work for you. And when it wasn't doing that, it was a system where you had to precisely aim with an imprecise input device. PC with mouse mitigated both of these, but then you're stuck with a game where every other action is less fun with a keyboard. But the definitive edition on Switch did something to almost earn that moniker. We have the option for free aim with gyro controls. From my experiences, gyro is the best way to play any of the 3D GTA games, but it sadly isn't normalized, and in this game, it wasn't done as well as it probably should have been. This isn't modded GTA 5 with Steam controller support and every single sensitivity option tailored to your needs. This is the Switch GTA 3 with seemingly begrudgingly implemented gyro, just because Nintendo fans get upset when devs don't implement it. Just look at the Resident Evil 4 port on Switch, it could have been so much more. The gyro here in GTA 3 has a single sensitivity bar with increments that feel too long, and you obviously can't adjust each axis individually. But with some tinkering and practicing, I found this to be much more fun than just relying on what is essentially aimbots. It takes practice because it was so poorly implemented, and I'm not really the best at aiming anyway, even with a mouse, so don't take my gameplay on screen as a result of what you should expect yourself. I don't play twitchy games because I am bad at video games. The choice in gyro aiming does make some sections harder, but even when that was the case, I found it much more enjoyable as a person who has put hundreds of hours into these games where the aiming was done for me automatically. But one area where it universally helps, and I can't see a reason why anyone would disagree with this, is the sniper rifle. This finally feels good to use in one of these games. Aiming with the assistance of gyro is such an improvement, and on the topic of sniping, the moon still changes when it's shot. Glad they didn't mess it up here. And to skip ahead to the third of these videos, the gyro makes a lot of sections much easier, like Zero's turret mission in San Andreas. Pretty much every first-person aiming section, whether they be turret sections or drive-bys, will be so much easier in this trilogy with gyro. A stick only doesn't cut it, so if this is an option for you, make the most of it. When I was using smaller weapons like the pistol or SMG, which allowed free movement while aiming, GTA 3 suddenly turned into a run and gun pray and spray. For how unimportant this may seem to some people, it gave me a feeling I'd never had in a console GTA game before. I know this is old news to PC players who use a mouse for GTA, but this was the first time I experienced this since my days in the early 2000s, playing weird Vice City online sessions of cops and robbers with a pirated copy, and some pirated servers my brother helped log me into. It was nice just having this kind of freedom again, especially when I'm sitting on a couch and not huddled over a computer that can't even run The Sims 2 on anything but low settings. Everything feels much more fluid now, even when we're in cars. We don't have the drive-by controls of the HD titles, which is fine. I'd actually dislike it since I personally like the restrictive precision of shooting at 90-degree angles, but we can rotate the camera, meaning we can still do those 90-degree shootouts, but with a better view of what's in front of us. And the option to snap to those angles is still there if you don't want this kind of freedom, but if we just turn the stick, Claude will shoot in whichever direction we're focused on. Still in that 90-degree window, but hey, we get more visibility without sacrificing the core gameplay that this was designed around. Plus I like to fidget a lot with my hands, so now I get to have even more fun driving. Thanks Rockstar, this almost makes up for my lack of ADD meds. Any extra difficulty I saw by using my own body instead of aim assist was mitigated since we have a checkpoint system of sorts here, though the title is a bit misleading. Missions themselves don't have checkpoints within them, but instead once you start a mission, the game performs an autosave in a separate slot to manual saves, and when you fail a mission from dying, getting busted, or failing the actual task, the game will pop up a screen asking if you wish to reload to the checkpoint, which here in 3 is always the start of a mission. This is basically a time and money saver. Without this, you'd have to buy more weapons and ammo, then drive to the mission start, or if you felt like cheesing it, you'd load your most recent save, which was likely right before the mission itself, and then drive to that destination again. Vice City Stories was the first game in the series to properly allow players to get back into the action after failure, and even then, it wasn't a series standard for a long time. At the risk of being called casual scum, I love this feature in this remake, and it does make the original harder to want to go back to. It wasn't really a big punishment in the original to fail a mission, but hey, I've got things to do with my day, I don't want to keep driving and rebuying ammo. Especially considering how this game ends, you want to hoard that money as much as possible. Though this checkpoint system itself isn't perfect, since we still have to repeat the monotonous bits too, and hidden packages aren't saved, so if you're like me and fail a mission multiple times and collect the package on the way, you're collecting that multiple times in case this is the run that you actually succeed. This autosave isn't just a checkpoint for missions, it serves as an actual save slot, meaning you can turn off your console or switch games, and as soon as you come back you'll be at the beginning of whatever mission you were on, or load up wherever the mission ended. You don't need to go back to a safe house before getting off, but it's still an option for old people like me that don't trust autosaves. Another nice addition of this game, thanks to the remake, is the modern innovation of the radial menu for switching weapons and radio. This one slows down time like GTA 5, so whether you're switching to head radio or to a rocket launcher, you'll always be able to do it without breaking the pace or leaving yourself open to the world around you. The ability to cycle weapons and radio by mashing a button is still there like old times, and it can be nice when you know what's next in the chain, but it's pretty much a superfluous thing that has no real right to be here. Speaking of superfluous things that have no right to be here, we have a melee punch that can be used even when weapons are equipped. In the original, you would inadvertently do this when you're attempting to shoot someone who is right up in your face, but now it's an option we can choose for fun. I wouldn't miss it if it was removed, but I do like this addition. Whether it be for variety, or to conserve ammo, it is a fun novelty, and it means we never need to have the fist equipped, which is fine by me. But it's not all fun additions. The most controversial part of this definitive edition is the new art direction. Each of the 3 games here has different strengths and weaknesses, but as a rule of thumb, my opinion is I like the idea they were going for, but it wasn't executed properly. I like this new Claude, I have no problems with him. I see this as a straight up improvement, even if it looks more like a doll of Claude than the real thing. Realism isn't always the goal, and if they went and completely redesigned him to look more realistic, we'd lose something. Whether you're on the team of the games were always cartoony looking, or it was realistic but aged over the decades, the end result is these characters do not look realistic today, and every character here in 3's remake looks like their original model and artwork, even if some liberties were taken. Even if that wasn't the reason they did this, this was clearly done for time and budget. I like what they did here, but some characters look less good than I would have wanted, and in addition to this coming to mobile platforms, I feel like a quick deadline led to these being the mixed bag they are, but hey, it's a mixed bag I personally like. With these new visuals we get a new draw distance, which I feel like is a positive all around in GTA 3. Visibility is so much better, except for the car draw distance on the Switch still being poor, much like its performance. But hey, at least the streets are easier to navigate now. We even have the new GPS function that acts like it does in GTA 5. Personally, it's something I don't need as someone that knows Liberty City streets intimately, but it is a straight up improvement and I wouldn't argue against it, especially to people that don't remember a 20-year-old video game map as well as I do. And if you really don't like it, just don't look at the bottom corner, okay? The biggest potential miss I see here with the new art is the new feel of Liberty City. The original game had more blues and it felt darker and less welcoming. Blur was used generally from everything from when you're speeding to the stationary light sources dotted everywhere. This gave the game an almost dreamlike feel, which obviously wasn't meant to be taken literally, but it oozed this kind of charm, even if it didn't look especially impressive in terms of things like pixel count or other words I took from Digital Foundry. None of that is here in Definitive Edition. Before I go any further, I will say I almost certainly would have preferred an update to the old look, or even the ability to switch styles between old and new, which would have made all my following complaints pretty redundant. This isn't what I would have done if I was put in charge of this game, but the style we have now has its merits. Liberty City was never a real looker to begin with, so you could argue the sterile look here fits the city quite well. But to give actual compliments instead of backhanded ones, the lighting in this game is a technical improvement and shadows aren't just baked in textures. While this may seem like a small thing, it really does help to change the atmosphere, and the passage of time is better represented than it ever was in the original game. When the city is lit up, especially against weather like rain or fog, it stands out and is actually pretty beautiful for what it is. The new Liberty City is generally brighter and more pleasant to look at, but not so drastically that the mood is gone. This can still be a dark and gloomy place. We just have more variety in the appearance here, which may not be to everyone's preference, but I do find it still works quite well. And honestly, the new sky here does look quite good. The clouds are really impressive even if it interferes with my ability to snipe the moon. This feels like a pretty decent, but not great fan mod to the original, which is an unfortunate comparison given Rockstar's treatment to such mods. But if you go in thinking this is a mod to the original, and the original still exists out there if you want to play it, even if it's secondhand or acquired after turning on your VPN, this game doesn't seem so disappointing, and in some ways it truly does earn that definitive title, even if it misses the Saint mark in a lot of areas. Just to interrupt myself, during the editing of this particular video, we actually got an update to these games. The first one of 2022. From my couple hours messing around with each one of these, I noticed generally better performance and visuals, which also includes less texture seams, and in regards to GTA 3 specifically, Claude can no longer walk on the water in the park, and while I can't test every particular example of this because I lost count of how many times it happened, it seems the issue of object visuals and actual collision boxes not being in sync has been fixed, or at least it has been fixed in some cases. Some glitches and unpleasantness are still here, most shockingly of all, some things are even worse. I'm sure those issues will be patched in an update 1.0.7, and the game will be much better for it. It's already running a lot better on Switch, and with those few hiccups notwithstanding, this is something I would not feel bad showing someone. But this also means all the footage I got for all three games is for an old version, and won't necessarily reflect what players see today, and especially what they will see with some hypothetical patch that doesn't exist and may not even exist, where everything is much better. The silver lining here is the game is getting better, and much like how you shouldn't rely on day one reviews of games months or years after release, this video is further proof of the mixed blessings of updates that fix issues with games. Now back to past me to complain about some performance issues that no longer exist. There are only 5 real issues I outright despise here with the visuals. GTA 3 was not meant to be up-res this much, so we have multiple buildings now where different textures just pop in and you can see the seams very clearly. Like the windows on this one building, it is disgusting. This will be less of an issue in the remakes of Vice City and San Andreas, thankfully. This particular section of road really gets to me. Why is it like this? It wasn't like this in the original or Liberty City Stories, and it doesn't get fixed when the bridge opens up. It's always going to be this mess, and I hate it. We have an issue of visuals that actually affects how the game is played, because a concerning amount of objects in this city, and only this city since I didn't see it in Vice City or San Andreas, have physical collision space and visuals of the appearance not lining up. We will get stopped by an invisible wall, then move a few steps to another side, and walk through what should be a solid object. Cars don't smoke up nearly as much when they're almost destroyed, Instead of incrementing levels of smoke to indicate that this car should be abandoned, it is much more subtle, and we go from a seemingly roughed up but still fine car to one that is on fire and seconds away from exploding, which is especially bad in GTA 3 where we can't really jump out of moving vehicles. And finally, the public toilets in the park here are just 2 separate women's rooms now, which means men are essentially a second-class citizen. Wait, why did I list that as a problem? That's pretty cool. My list of complaints doesn't end there, but now we're onto things beyond just visuals. Claude can walk in the water in this park, which is odd, and while that could be a visual thing, he also seemingly can't run up these stairs properly in the same park, so I think there's some weird stuff going on here. In fact, Salvatore's driveway also doesn't line up on the minimap, so there are some spatial anomalies happening in Liberty City circa 2001. And while I can work around the draw distance of cars not being great, this limited draw distance proved to be a hindrance in one particular sniping mission where I couldn't even see the explosive barrels unless I got closer before aiming the sniper rifle. But I don't want to detract from the good additions here. We have an actual map screen which the original game did not have, and this even has a gang toggle option so you can know which areas are controlled by which gang in case you're not aware. We have an option to hold the run button instead of mashing it in typical Rockstar fashion, which is not only more comfortable, it is much more accessible to people who can't hammer a button. And on that front, we have accessibility options for subtitle and tip sizes, and each game even has a colorblind option, which better differentiates the places we should be going on the map, so we don't have to just rely on color. We have shapes now to go off. And the GPS has a moving pattern going through it, so it will never blend in with your map. Honestly, even if you downright hated the visual changes here, between those and the ability to switch weapons in a radial menu while slowing down time, this is the much more definitive version to a section of people who benefit from these options. And while I don't care for it in particular, we have achievements now so you can show how good you are at 20-year-old video games. This replay gave me a new appreciation for what was my least favourite of the GTA games that I had completed, but now it's jumped up quite a few places, even if in this collection it's still in last place like I expected it to be. This is a good version of a good game. I wouldn't say it's the definitive version, but even if this was the ultra detailed big budget re-release, there would still be people arguing it's not definitive, because the original has its charms, and that secret sauce is never going to be recreated. Just ignore the title definitive, it's a marketing ploy like Game of the Year edition. This is a good game, and a new generation of people can experience such an important title, and old people can get some nostalgic fun from it. It does some things better like the general gameplay, even if some things like the visual flair are a bit worse. Pick your poison. With this currently available one, or the one that Rockstar is pretending doesn't exist but you can still easily get your hands on, either way, you're in for a good time. But don't be too hard on this remake. It's patched and it's solid, this isn't the same game it was on launch day. And if you want the ultimate best way to play this game, you're probably playing a very modded version of the PC release anyway, so this game's existence won't impact you. So keep on being you while I keep on playing GTA 3 in bed with gyro controls and frame dips. This is my comfort food now, even if it's the worst of the 3 comfort foods I have on Switch. Next time, it'll be Grand Theft Auto Vice City circa 1986. A world with a lot more charm, and a story that contains like 1 or 2 original ideas maybe.